Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and I'm excited to introduce you to Jonathan Foster. Jonathan and I just have become acquainted in the last year through Tom Oord. And so if you're a regular listener, you could go back and check out my interviews with Tom Oord. And Jonathan did recently did his doctoral work at Northwind University. And I think Tom was he the guy that you worked with?
Yep, you can blame him for all the stuff.
Right. So, Jonathan is from Kansas City. He's a fellow church planter. He comes from the Nazarene background, father, pastor, church planter, now a writer, podcaster, all these things. And we've bumped into each other at Theology Beer Camp, I think last year. Weren't you in Springfield last year? And then we've had coffee here in Kansas City, and we probably are going to cross paths again in Wyoming and in Denver this year too. Oh, and then we were at the Uncontrolling Love deal too. So yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So our paths are crossing quite a bit lately. And then I was so grateful. He sent me two of his books. One is called Indigo, The Color of Grief. And the other one, quite the academic read, I would say, but still very readable. Theology of Consent. Mimetic Theory in an Open and Relational Universe. So, John and I first like to just get a little of your backstory, your origin story, so people kind of know where you're coming from. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up, your family of origin, and maybe your faith journey. And give us a little bit of your background.
Man, it's really good to be with you. Thank you for having me on. And thanks for the work that you do. And yeah, so I grew up in the great state of Iowa. Most of my upbringing happened there. My dad was a Nazarene pastor. Both granddads were pastors. A bunch of pastors in the extended family. So just a long line of, depending on how you look at it, good or bad, just a long line of that stuff. And for the most part, had a good relationship with my family. My family had a great relationship with, had a great father. He was certainly heavy on the legalistic side, but personally, we always had a really good relationship. And so that was interesting over the years. Later in my life, the love that he and I had, and that he clearly had for his family and life, and the love that he preached about, wound up subverting a lot of that legalism for me in a really odd, kind of paradoxical kind of way. But I kind of didn't have a chance. The mimetic energy was so strong on our family. I was going to be a pastor. That was pretty much it. And I would have loved to have been a professional, athlete, but clearly that wasn't going to go very far. So I started doing church work and stuff, and then church planting, yes, was really fun and enjoyable. Regular church, whatever. I don't mean that to be totally pejorative, just slightly pejorative. Regular church was never going to work for me, but church planning was great. A lot of fun. We met a lot of just really interesting people that you don't get a chance to meet in regular church. And did that for I was part of the 3 church plants, moved back to here in Kansas City. I was in Arizona for many years. And then most recently back here in Kansas City. Until that went away, I was officially uninvited from the tribe. And there's a lot of other stuff. It's been a really interesting few years, and some of it's totally absurd, but also some of it I'm really thankful for, or all of it I'm thankful for. And here we are talking about it.
Mm-hmm. So where'd you do your bachelor's? Where'd you do your master's?
Yeah, well, I went to Mid-American Nazarene University. You would not have known it if you were there in the 90s when I was there, because I was not at class and I didn't learn anything. But because I was too busy playing with fire, in the dorm room.
Was on fire, yeah. So anyway, that's in our and by the way, if you want to jump on and be a supporter.
That's right. That's called a teaser, folks. So, and then I didn't go to seminary for a while. And it's funny, when I first started, I went to Phoenix Seminary, which is a full-on Calvinistic Wayne Grudem, seminary out in Phoenix. Took a few classes out there until I kind of figured out that, this is not going to work. Then took some classes at NTS, Nazarene Theological Seminary, but finally finished all that up at the aforementioned Northwind before I started my doctoral dissertation at Northwind as well.
Okay. So you did a master's and a doctorate with Northwind, or finished a master's? Okay.
Yeah, I had to finish the master's to get the doctorate going. So I finished up a class or two, and because I was that close, and then jumped into the dissertation.
You met your wife in college at Mid-American Nazarene? Right. Where you met her?
That's right. We were 18 years old, and we were put in a public relations group, called them PR groups back in the day. And we'd go around, to camps and churches and sing and talk about the school. And the rule was there was no dating in the groups. So we started dating. and here we are.
Amazing what happens when you break the rules.
Yeah, you should, don't tell me what I can't do, man.
All right. So, and you had 3 children, right? 3 beautiful children.
Yep. That's right. A daughter and two boys.
What year was your oldest is?
Yeah.
Remind me.
Yeah. So Quincy was our daughter, and she would be 30. Where are we at? 20? Yeah. This year she would have been 30. And then our oldest son is 27 and our youngest is 23. And we do have a granddaughter now, which is, I don't know. Do you have any granddaughters, Fred?
I have no kids and have.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Yeah. And
I didn't remember that.
Therefore, no grandkids. I do have 3 younger sisters who had kids, and then they have all had kids. So I have like 17 great nephews and nieces between the ages of birth and 8 or 9.
Wow.
And we all live pretty close, and we're all close. So I still.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah. So
that's fun.
But no,
the granddaughter is about 4 months old, and she's a blast. So we're really enjoying that new season in life.
Excellent. Yeah. So, so let's talk about the tragedy that you went through with your oldest, because most of the people aren't going to know, other than what you've just shared. But let's talk about, share that experience. And then I want to, move from that into how that affected you, your relationship to God, your theology, and then the books that you've been writing.
Right.
And I'm curious too, how did that experience impact your theology? Kind of.
Oh my, right. It
just
it
tell us what happened. And
it affected everything. And it definitely colored my theology every possible way. But, well, there's actually been, unfortunately, there's been a ton of loss in my life. There's a lot of things that we've walked through, and but the most intense of which took place New Year's Day, 2015, when our oldest daughter was our oldest child. Our daughter was killed in a car wreck, and Yeah, that just, it changed everything. It's weird. It's not like I got mad at God, though some people accuse me of getting mad at God. It's funny how people accuse you of all kinds of things when your theology starts to shift. But it wasn't that I was mad at God. It's just that I was just trying to figure out what it means. Like, what the hell does this mean? Like, what is going on? You know, and my identity as a dad, like so much of who I was wrapped up. I loved being a father, and still do. And it was just the most fun thing I ever did. And she and I had a great relationship, and she had a great relationship with her brothers and her mom. And, you know, she was just a great kid. So it caused me to start to pull at the proverbial thread. And I'm still pulling at the proverbial thread, really. Although I will say, as of, you know, our recording today, like almost 9.5 years later, I genuinely feel like in the last couple of months, for the first time in 9.5 years, that I'm kind of I'm in a different enough place that I don't have to pull at the thread so hard. Maybe that's the way to say it, because it's been fast and furious, off and on for multiple years. But yeah, I can say more about that, or if you have a specific question.
I'm curious about because I actually want to talk a little bit about theology of consent first,
Sure,
and then go to indigo. Okay.
Sure.
So because of the theology of consent book, you know, which is we're gonna dive into that in just a minute, but so would you have considered yourself, I mean, being from the Nazarene tradition, I'm assuming that you were an Arminian.
Yeah.
You would have leaned, you weren't a Calvinist when you studied at Phoenix with Grudem. He's a Calvinist. You knew you weren't, that didn't fit, right?
Right.
So you would have probably been a classical theist, right? With an Arminian.
Probably.
With an Arminian perspective on, you know, free will defense of evil and suffering and those kind of things. I'm assuming.
Right. I would have been like, it's interesting. Yes, Nazarenes are Wesleyan Arminian, and so what's funny is for many Nazarene churches, especially now, you know, a lot of the congregants would not realize that they're Wesleyan Arminian because they act like Calvinists and fundamentalists. But technically, it's an organization, a tradition that was supposed to have a big table. You know, the table's big. Of course, at one point, they literally told me the table's not that big, Jonathan. So that was a turning point. But yeah, that would have been kind of the way I would have emoted and operated. But the truth is, you know, I wasn't much of a theologian, and I'm not saying that I necessarily am now, but I really wasn't that deep into it. As funny as it is, I was a church planner. I love life. I had kids. You know, we grew churches. I mean, our church wasn't as big as anything like you had led, but you know, we were successful and effective, and you know, we're doing kind of like the American Christianity thing. But then when the losses started piling up, yes, it caused me to think, okay, now what's going on? In particular, when our daughter died, my question was, basically my question was like, why did that have to happen? And then every time I had that question, the next question is, well, wait a minute. Why did Jesus have to die? Why did that happen to Jesus? So for me, it's kind of like all the smaller questions. I say smaller. I mean, it's no small question to consider why your kid has to die, but those were like tributaries that ran into the bigger stream for me. And the bigger stream, the river, was, well, what do I think happened, you know, with Jesus? And it's slightly embarrassing to say. I was in my 40s and had been pastoring for years and was a reasonably intelligent person, but I had up to that point just been parroting the traditional American Christian thing, which is, well, Jesus had to die because, I don't know, because, you know, we're sinful and God needed death and needed the bloodshed. And, let's sing some songs about blood and confess our sins and call it a day. Well, that was no longer working. For one thing, I knew as a dad, and certainly as a human being, so I'm not saying that you have to be a dad to get this, but I definitely knew as a dad that I didn't need anything to die in order for me to love my kids. I mean, I just freaking loved them. And I never needed them to change or be anything other than who they were. So the whole idea of sacrifice in order to get to that thing, and now I call it, I co-opt Walter Wink's phrase, but I call it the myth of redemptive sacrifice. The whole idea that, that needs to happen in order for love or grace or forgiveness, whatever, to be dispensed, frankly, is reprehensible to me. So I was already struggling with that, but I didn't really have great ways to understand maybe what was happening at the cross. I'm not suggesting that all of us or any of us can fully understand that, but in that milieu of wondering and being deeply, intensely interested in theology, probably really for the first time in my life, I landed upon René Girard, who's a French anthropologist who had this thing called mimetic theory. And once I worked through that, and if we want, we can unpack that some, but I'll just jump forward a little bit in the story and say, once I worked through that, the way I say it is it gave me a reasonably intelligent way to understand why Jesus had to die. And for the first time, I got it. Jesus had to die because we killed him. That's what we do. We have ordered our civilization upon scapegoating violence for millennia now. And Jesus stepped into that, not because God needed him in order for some, metaphysical transactional thing to take place, but because Jesus was the coolest person ever because he loved people. He was a friend of sinners. He identified with the victim, and he subverts the scapegoating mechanism. He becomes a scapegoat to undo the scapegoating thing. So once that was towards the end of 2015. Once that kind of that was just, man, that was like lighting a freaking fuse in my life. And I started running with that. And I've never looked back. And it is literally, it's not too dramatic to say that it has changed everything in my life. Because then I started going oh, I get it. We scapegoated Jesus. Well, who are we scapegoating now? I mean, among other things, this is what I did. Well, there's no shortage of people we scapegoat now. But in my tradition, queer folk are the ones who are scapegoated the absolute most. There's an unwritten hierarchy of who gets the most shame cast upon them
for their sins.
And exactly. Right. Quote unquote, for their sins. Right. And I already knew that I struggled with all of that. And I wasn't, I'd like to think I wasn't anti-gay at that point, but I was probably somewhere in the middle trying to figure it out, but I was still trying to lead with grace. Well, once I got mimetic theory kind of straight in my head, I realized this is BS, man. This is nuts. We are scapegoating these people in the name of God. How absurd is that? So I changed my posture, and I tried to leverage the fact that our denomination, we always said we had a big table, but they told me it's not that big. We would like you to surrender your credentials. So that was kind of a long, dramatic story. But at the end of all that, like I say, it was the hardest, easiest decision I ever made. And finally, after the last of multiple meetings, when they told me this, I finally decided, you know what? I think I will. And so life changed after that. But anyhow, that's a lot of stuff I just threw at you.
What year was that you exited?
So that would have been 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's back up a minute. René Girard, and let's just assume we're talking to a lay audience. It's your comments about Jesus's sacrifice. I think the way I like to say it so that it gets lay people thinking about it is did God really have to kill somebody to forgive us?
Right.
Did God have to commit an act of violence to forgive and to love,
Right.
And that starts, if you just start dwelling on that a little bit, and especially an innocent person, he didn't kill the guilty person, but he takes an innocent bystander and at least kill the bad guy.
Yeah.
and then his own son, so if you just start thinking about a regular father here on this planet, and some crook down the road does something, and then Jonathan's going to kill his son so he can forgive the crook down the road. It really falls apart, when you think about that. And I like to say the myth of redemptive violence versus the myth of redemptive sacrifice, because sacrifice, you have two, you started playing with two different ideas around sacrifice, right? I actually forgot the two terms you used.
They're reflexive and non-reflexive.
Yeah. Reflexive and non-reflexive, which points to two different types. But before we get into the myth of redemptive violence or sacrifice, what the heck is mimetic theory? Yeah. And why was that important to you, and why was that so important for you to meld mimetic theory with open and relational process theology stuff? And this is your book, Theology of Consent. There's a great paragraph on page 52, which I'll read it real quick, and then you untangle it for us. Assume that we don't know what mimetic is and why that's important. Sure. Why René Girard is important in this conversation. Mimetic theory tells us a great deal about the reality of human nature. It reveals our interconnectedness, our inability to separate our desire from the desire of the other, and the way we imitate one another in the pursuit of metaphysical autonomy, completeness, or wholeness. When the pursuit leads us to the brink of chaos, mimetic theory uncovers the ways we build unity with others to, quote, save ourselves and our communities. Ultimately, as it connects the dots between culture, religion, and the ritualization of the scapegoating mechanism, it insists that modern civilization is built upon the myth of redemptive sacrifice. I would probably say redemptive violence. Unpack that for us. What in the heck is that?
That's a nice little chapter. I like that. It's like, who wrote that? That's good.
That's a great paragraph. Let me see here.
Well, maybe, good paragraph. Maybe if it's all right, I'll just kind of unpack. I usually talk about mimetic theory as a fivefold movement that plays out against a couple of ideas, and it's probably best I can do it fairly quickly. It's slightly scandalous that I try to do it quickly, because this is a theory, a way of approaching the world that people like René Girard and Girardians will spend their lifetime trying to. So my apologies to anyone listening who might know something about it and listen to me riff on it, and I think I can do it in about 6 minutes. But maybe I should do that, and then that will help, because again, for the initial catalyst was, why did Jesus have to die? I was looking for other ways. What I didn't realize at the time was, and what I'll say now is, I was looking for nonviolent ways to get to begin to unpack who Jesus was, non-sacrificial ways, now I call them non-scapegoating, uncontrolling kinds of ways. Mm-hmm. And this became my way in. So it's not linear like this. It's a very nonlinear thing, but I'll lay it out in a linear way because that's what humans do. So, that's how we understand things. But it's a fivefold movement, plays out against two things. The two things it plays out against is, number one, that we live in a relational cosmos. Everything's interconnected. There is no vacuum. There's no outer space anywhere that doesn't have something in it. There's always something interacting with something else. I'm not an ex nihilo guy, which means I'm not a God created out of nothing guy. I'm a God has always been around and has always been creating, and matter and stuff has always been entangled with them. Ilya DeLeo calls it the divine entanglement. And I think that's what's going on. So we live in a relational cosmos. The second thing is that mimetic theory plays against is, or really emerges out of, is this idea that what seems to be true about us human beings, what we all, a common denominator that connects all of us, is this a thing that, like, we're all aware of our own insecurity, our own, in a philosophical language, we would call it lack. Like our own, there's like existential angst that we all carry about something. Religious language, we would call it, sin or some kind of brokenness or something. So it's this idea that something is missing. So out of that, Girard lays out this kind of system. It's a fivefold movement. It's desire, imitation, conflict, scapegoating, and religion. So the first thing is that my desire, like, I don't know exactly what I want until I'm around someone else. So my desires are influenced or mediated by the desires of other people. So our marketing people know this the best. So the advertisers will not show you what kind of car you want to drive. They'll show you the kind of car your model drives. And then you become influenced by your model. And your model is usually, if not always, slightly better looking, a little bit more affluent. Because the idea here, and this is important, is that your model needs to look like they don't have lack, like they are put together. They don't have a crack or existential anxiety about them. So we begin to desire what the other person desires, which turns into imitation. And now I want that car. And by the way, our model, they're actually also subjects themselves. And so they see the attention I pay the car, and I'm paying attention to the car, which drives the value of the car up. It also drives, for Girard, it drives internal conflict up, because as we all know, there is no car that can fill that gap, that hole, that kind of lack, that thing in your life. By the way, foreshadowing side note, I don't even think God fills that hole. I think it's a whole, kind of different thing, but that's going on with God. So, desire leads to imitation, drives the value of that thing up, drives conflict up, because now we're both going for that thing. And it's never just me and my model. We always have communities that we pull in with us. So I have a group, they have a group. I've got some politics, they've got some politics. I know it's hard to believe. I've got a church group, they've got a church group, or I have people inside my church, and they've got some people. So it's this imitation that leads to conflict. It brings the community with us. And the conflict grows and grows, the tension grows, because we can't get enough of that thing. And there's a whole bunch of stuff I'm skipping over. But the fourth piece that is most well known in terms of what Girard talks about is this idea of scapegoating. And so what Girard says is that at the edge of the precipice, when our desires have led us to imitate and then have increased the conflict between me and my model and our communities, at the edge of the precipice, when we're both pointing our fingers at the other person and angry and mad because we can't assuage the angst inside of us, we decide to, at kind of like a invisible, slightly mysterious last minute kind of a way, we decide to turn and point our fingers at someone else. And then we offload, is the way I say it, all of our psychospiritual drama onto the back of someone else. And then I agree with my model that, you know what, it's really not your fault. It's really not my fault. It's actually that person's fault. And then we throw them in the volcano. We lynch them on a tree. We hang them on a cross. We don't sit with them at the lunchroom table. We write bad social media posts about them. Like, the list is endless, because when we offload our psychospiritual drama onto the other, we're seeing the worst parts of us in them, and it justifies us getting rid of them. So this is scapegoating. And the crazy thing is, we keep doing it over and over because it works. It dissipates the tension in a crowd, and it'll insert a measure of peace into the situation. The problem is, of course, the peace never lasts. And so then when the tension builds back up again, we basically rinse and repeat. And we ritualize. What Girard says is that we've ritualized the whole thing over the centuries, over the millennia, till religion emerged out of all of that. That's the fifth piece that I often talk about. And so the last thing I'll just say is, often you'll hear people say that religion does nothing but engender violence. Actually, for Girard, it's worse than that. It's violence has engendered religion. It's because we never dealt with our existential anxiety in the first place that has led us down to create this whole fabricated scapegoating mechanism, which is completely an exercise in missing the point. And then we have picked our victims and we've killed them, and we've done it all in the name of getting to peace, which we call God. And so that's mimetic theory in a super fast, quick nutshell. And yeah, I guess I'll stop there for now.
My God, it's the cycle of violence and retribution that has animated all of Homo sapien history.
Yep. From
the tribal conflicts to, like, right now, Netanyahu saying, hey, if we can just kill every last one of these Hamas people, then we'll be at peace and everything will be cool. And the community will be healed if we can just kill all these Hamas people.
Yep. And
it just creates the cycle of violence and the trauma on top of trauma. And then people think that trauma, violence never heals violence, right? So, but that's how we've lived, and a religion has helped animate that. You can just study the Reformation and see how Christians are killing Christians in the name of Jesus, let alone Christians killing Muslims in the name of Jesus, or Christians killing other kinds of people, or they kill each other in the name of Jesus. Get to kill these Anabaptists because they believe in believers' baptism. So, damn, we gotta burn them at the stake and drown them.
It's unbelievable.
So that Switzerland can feel okay about everything. Anyway, no, I'm playing now, but it's true. There's truth in it, right? So I'm just trying to sort it out. I mean, this is the cycle of violence that we've been working with, and this is Girard trying to understand that at a pretty cultural, deep level with and how religion has animated that, the myth of redemptive violence, right?
Yeah, it's given us handles as to why this takes place. So it's been helpful for me in 1,000 different instances. But one way it's been helpful is it tells me more than just, violence is the thing we turn to. It tells me why. And part of the reason why is because, first of all, I'm implicated in all of this too. Because I don't deal with my own anxiety, and then I power up with someone else in unity to get rid of something else, because that it's a big distraction. It helps me not think about my own issues, and I can pretend for a minute or a season or a year or whatever the time might be. I can pretend for a while that it's really someone else's fault, and then I don't have to own my own issues and my own, existential angst. So it started to give me really good handles as to why this was taking place, and also how long it's been taking place, and the story of Jesus, how it plays out against all of it, and how my own religious tradition was just replicating the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So explain the difference between the two types of sacrifice. Give us the language you used in the two different types of sacrifice, and why one so meaningful and the other can be just repeat the cycle of what Girard was talking about.
Right. So when I went into this, when I first started really deciding I was going to write about this, I was really what I decided I would do was to outline how I thought mimetic theory was wired, and then how I thought open and relational theology was wired. And then I crossed the wires and just watched the smoke rise. What I knew going into it, what I intuited, was that both mimetic theory and open and relational theology, they're both deeply suspicious of anything that has to do with sacrifice, and how quickly sacrifice can be co-opted by those in charge, by the powerful, and to become a tool and to force people to do things. And so I really, really struggled with that. And it was one of the last things I wrote about, because I was trying to figure out what does sacrifice mean? Because we all know there's a good type of sacrifice. There's an altruistic sacrifice. Is there anything better than when someone volitionally lays down their life for another person? And I would say there's probably not. There's probably not bigger evidence of goodness and beauty and love in the world than something like that. So I kind of landed on this reflexive and non-reflexive thing that you're referencing. Honestly, the linchpin, it all hinges upon consent, which is a big part of the reason I came up with the title, Theology of Consent. Essentially, non-reflexive sacrifice, which is just a way I'm kind of using some descriptive English language kind of stuff, is the kind of sacrifice that requires you to sacrifice. Reflexive is all about the individual choosing to enter into it. It's a consensual thing. And so what I want to say, and what I think is true, is that the entire cosmos, if God is a God of love, and I define love as this uncontrolling, non-binary, non-violent, non-scapegoating energy that's in relationship with all things meant for flourishing. If God is love, then maybe the entire cosmos revolves around consensual relationship and love inviting people to sacrifice, and creatures and entities and amalgamations of entities. And we can get off in the weeds with that, but let's, I guess, just stick with people. Love inviting people to sacrifice for beautiful, really good reasons, not because love needs the sacrifice, not because love needs to do violence to one thing in order to bless another thing, which is something I'm sure you were taught, and I was taught as well, either overtly or covertly, that, oh, well, God, this needs to happen so that God can make this happen, which frankly just sounds like something I could do. I mean, any of us could do that. Love is so much more imaginative that it's capable of coming up with ways to help everyone flourish. And I think one of those ways is this consensual sacrifice. So inviting you to lay down your life. If you choose to do so, it's your choice. God's not making you do it. It's a really beautiful thing. But if you find yourself in a system where you have to sacrifice, it's a terrible thing. So for me, non-reflexive sacrifice is unhealthy. Reflexive is healthy, because reflexive is consensual, cares about what the person is going through and thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you think, what's weird for me is when I first started thinking about atonement theory, I think I would have bought into and preached bad versions, what I would call now bad versions of the atonement, right?
Unhealthy versions. Yeah.
What Jesus did. But I remember reading John Stott's book, The Cross of Christ, and he was defending substitutionary atonement, but the way he defended it got me thinking about it in a deep, deep way. This was 25 years ago, that I read that book, and it got me thinking about this issue of it's not a third innocent party who had nothing to do with anything that God brought into it and killed his son in order to forgive us. That's insanity. That's unjust, right? But the verse that's ended up meaning so much to me was, God is in Christ reconciling the world to, right. And I started realizing this, it's a model of forgiveness. I mean, if I hurt you, how are you going to forgive me? I mean, you have to basically absorb the hurt and give forgiveness instead of retribution. I'm not going to retaliate and get back. Instead, I'm going to absorb the pain and the hurt, and then I'm going to give you forgiveness and love anyway, even though you've hurt me deeply. And it's like Christ, in some way, is the model for forgiveness, a modeling for the whole world, how forgiveness works and how important it is. Otherwise, we just kill each other and perpetuate the cycle of violence and retribution and revenge and anger and hostility. It's it's one or the other almost, right? When it comes to hurts and pain.
Right. And the other thing about that verse, it's been super helpful and important for me too. God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, not counting our sins against us. So it's not the other way around. It's not like God was in the world waiting for Jesus to do something, which is the way that most Americanized Christianity looks at it. Like God was separate, like God had to turn his back.
Right.
Like God wasn't there that moment, that last second of breath that Jesus took. And that became something that was completely untenable for me either. Because first of all, how are you ever separate from love? You can't be separate from love. And plus that's antithetical to what other parts of what the Bible teaches. So I think you're accurate in locating your theology in that verse because it says an awful lot. Yeah.
So there's so many things I could go into, but I know
there's a lot to it, man.
No, it's just so much. Quantum physics, we touch on the relationality that's revealed of how the whole universe, down to matter and particles and everything are interrelated. It's to such an extent that it's a mystery we hardly can understand even with the best scientists. Right. And, and the relationality, when I think about like the classic verse that was used for the exclusiveness of Jesus, and Jesus followers are the only ones that go to heaven was like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but me. And years ago, I started going, well, wait, the way isn't like a set of objective doctrinal statements that excludes people if you don't agree with these. That's a foreign concept to any Hebrew understanding of truth or the way or the life, the Zoe. Truth itself, I think, in a Hebraic mindset is not objective statements of truth, but I think it's actually relational. Like truth in the Hebrew concept is relational. And this is stuff I got into when I was working on my PhD in the Hebrew stuff, but, and I started reading Abraham Joshua Heschel, and, he blew classic theism away from me from a Hebraic mind of pathos and that kind of stuff. And so I loved how you moved into, you tackle like God is love, but he's holy love, which means that he's going to kill you if you don't believe the right things, and he's going to burn you for all eternity if you don't believe. So God has these kids that he loves, but if you believe the wrong thing in this crazy world that we live in, then you're going to burn for all eternity. And like, what kind of loving parent would torture their kid forever, like because they questioned things or didn't believe some kind of thing, or, was on a journey of discovery, and like, it just makes no sense to me. Right. And so I love the way you tackled some of like truth and holy. By the way, this is an aside, and then I want to get into Indigo, because we could go down the rabbit hole too deep and we don't have enough time, but he, there's a guy that teaches at Phoenix with Grudem right now, who used to be at Southern Seminary, named Peter Gentry. Peter's Canadian. He's a brilliant linguist. He's doing a commentary on the Septuagint right now. He's a brilliant Hebrew linguist. He studied with some of the greatest modern Hebrew linguists in the world today. He's teaching at Phoenix right now, but I've met him. I've had him sign a couple of his books. He did a word study on holy, where he literally says that that idea of transcendent in holiness that, like, say, R.C. Sproul brings out, is actually the wrong interpretation. You know how words and how we interpret them are such a big deal. He did a complete word study on kadosh, the Hebrew word for holy, and really comes to the conclusion that it means devoted, not separate, but devoted. That God is, if you want to say, God is holy in the way he is radically devoted to his creation. If you go read through holiness through the Old and New Testament with that idea, devotedness, and I can give you his word studies. They were published in different ways, which I thought it would lead him to sort of our world. But here he is teaching with Grudem in this Calvinist seminary. And he's like, if you read everything he's written, it doesn't fit there. in my mind. And I've emailed him and tried to get him on my podcast to talk about his work on the word holy, and he won't do it because he knows I'm a little bit, I'm outside his camp.
Right.
But we've through the years we've talked quite a bit, and he might.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but so I've rethought that whole idea of transcendence versus immanence. That I don't, like Ward's teaching on Almighty, his word studies on Almighty, I think are really helpful and beneficial. And I think a reworking of our concept of holy would be helpful. And you did that with the word truth. You did that with the word holy. You picked up on, was it Gerard's view of holy? That is more about devotion to the victim versus, yeah. Anyway, I can geek out on that stuff, and my audience isn't so geeky, I think.
Well, let me just maybe put a little bow to that part of the conversation, if I can. Like, you're right. So for most open and relational thinkers, and I guess I'll just speak for myself, I want to say that the essence of God is love. Like, that is the thing. And for me personally, I kept running up like it needed to be something. I grew up in a context where actually the holiness was really the essence. So even though love was preached, it was always a hyphenated holy hyphen love, which meant basically you had to figure out what holiness was. And for our context, we would have loved Gentry's. I mean, we could have used Gentry's help there, but for our context, it was separateness. That's what holiness really amounted to. So you have a separate love. Well, that doesn't even make sense.
Right.
Other people that I interacted with, I knew they grew up with an overwhelming idea that wrath really was the essence of God. So you still have love, but it's a wrathful love. That doesn't make any sense. Or it's a sacrificial love, or it's a justice love, or it's a capital T truth love. Finally, I just decided, I'm doing away with all that. I think love is the thing. And all this other stuff reports to love versus the other way around. And once I started doing that over the process of a few years, I realized, this cleans up a lot of stuff. And it's amazing how often you two, I'm sure, I get in trouble with folks who don't want to do that because they want to hang on to the other stuff. And I'm like, you know what? I just think love is a more interesting, more compelling way to think of God than any of these other words that maybe even be found in the Bible. I just think love's better. So that's what I try to do.
I'm with you. Do a revolution of love here. I love that.
That's right.
So
speaking of love.
Oh my goodness, Jonathan, this book. Wow. I read it yesterday for the first time. Took me 2.5 hours, but I cried my way through with a cup of coffee.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, folks. I am feeling what I felt yesterday. So, but thank you for the book.
Thank you.
Wow. Some of the people that have endorsed Indigo, The Color of Grief. I mean, people like the author of Shack, Paul Young, John Caputo. I mean, they've put this up there in the echelon of some of the top books on grief that are out there in the market, Jonathan. And I would agree. I mean, I'm just, obviously I would just say this to anybody's listening. If you've ever gone through any kind of deep grief, deep loss, Jonathan's reflecting on the loss of his daughter at the age of 20, but any kind of deep loss that you've had happen in your life and you're processing the why, I was riding my bike the other day and I thought there's really no why, there just is. But I mean, that was my little, because I do mindful meditation now, and it's really focused on the present versus, I
like it,
regretting the past and fearing stuff. But, this is a powerful read. And you tell us about a couple of the ways of how you wrote, like everything's in You didn't capitalize anything. It's written. I want to for people who are looking. I'm opening the book up, but it's written like poetry. I mean, there's probably not more than 4, 5, 6 words per line. Like your longest sentences or lines are 5 or 6 words, right?
That's right. That's the goal, anyhow.
What? Yeah. To give us why did you approach it this way? Tell us why you structured the book the way you did.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because truly, are you familiar with the message is the medium, Marshall McLuhan phrase? So basically, the way something is communicated is as important as the thing it's communicating.
Okay.
And that is kind of certainly what's happening with Indigo. I wanted, first of all, I wrote it in a way that I would talk. I knew that it needed to be, spoken as well. And so I wrote it in that particular way. And secondly, I've always been interested in trying to say as much as you can with as few words as possible. Now, if you've heard me preach, you would laugh because I don't do a very good job of that. But I remember as a high school kid, the only time the only time I paid attention in high school outside of sports was English or literature. And I remember my junior year in high school reading Ernest Hemingway and really recognizing, this is somebody, he writes totally different than anyone I've ever read. He's saying a lot with, a very small amount. So I've loved that stuff. I love writing like Elie Wiesel, which I reference in the book, and Wiesel writes in that kind of way.
And that, for those that, the reference is the book Night.
Right.
And, I just recently did an interview with Brian Zahn on his new book, Wood Between the Worlds. And he has a chapter in there where he plays a little bit with Night's analogy. Where is God? He's in the gallows. And then you brought that in as well, which is one of the classic works on grief. And I love the way you referenced his work in this.
Well, thank you. When I was trying to shop this around to publishers, I was trying to say, and literary agents, I was trying to say that in some, I'm not trying to compare myself to Elie Wiesel, but in some distant, multiple related, grandson kind of a way, the writing is in something in that vein, both the style, but also the fact that I'm referencing him at times, because that was a really big part of the story on the day, our kid died. But the other thing I'll say about the way I wrote it, I wanted to leave a lot of white space in the book to remind people that they have I just wanted to give people space as they looked at it, rather than just you turn the page and there's all these words at you, so there's something about the pacing of all that seems to have worked really well as well.
I thought it was amazing what you did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I loved it. And you know what's interesting? I've been there's a Casey Writers workshop that Frances Story leads on Wednesday nights. I'll be there tomorrow night. And she's a writing coach. She's actually working with Frank Schaefer right now on his new book. And but she's from the queer community, and she started the slam poetry stuff in Kansas City and leads one of the larger writing workshops in Kansas City now. But she does these prompt things where you go and she does a prompt and then you get 10 minutes to write on it. And one of the prompts was you have to write no less. Every line had to be less than 6 words or less. And it was so I had tried to write like this based on this prompt that I had done just a month ago. Yeah. And interesting. Challenging it was to write like this.
It's like when someone tells you, you're used to preaching for 40 minutes and you go somewhere and they say, you have 15 minutes, or you're doing a TEDx talk or something and you have 17 minutes. And there's a saying that I'm sure you've heard too, I don't know what the saying is, but basically the idea is it's harder to say something in a shorter amount of time. No, if you go longer, you'll wind up not really getting to the point. And if you go shorter, you'll get to the point or something like that. And it really is more difficult most of the time to talk in a shorter amount of time and get in and out. And I think that's true of writing as well. And that was part of the thing I was trying to challenge myself with. So whereas Theology of Consent is 80,000 words, Indigo is 12,000. So.
Well, I thought it was, so it's, as you read Indigo, it's obvious that you're circulating ideas of open and relational theology into, but it comes across as so much from the heart, so personal. And anybody who's gone through loss and grief will find themselves in these words if they just read through it. And I think that, and I just love the way you emoted the sense of loss and chaos and confusion and hurt and pain. And, you know, you're 4/5, you were a family of 5, and now you're a family of fractions. And oh my goodness, I could go on and on and on. But one of the things I thought was really interesting, because, you know, I fell apart, Jonathan, and due to my own failures, and my whole world just exploded because of my own failures. It's just a totally different set of pain causes, right? But pain is pain. And whether
loss is loss,
somebody else caused it or some circumstance beyond anybody's control caused it, it still impacts us emotionally at the depths of our being. And I was angry at me. I was angry at God. I was angry at everything. I was angry. Like if somebody said, Fred, you're just mad at God, I'd say, hell yes. Like, and I've borrowed a phrase I've heard from a friend, like some gods deserve to die, you know. And some of the thoughts, because I was an Arminian. I thought about all the funerals. I've buried babies. I've done suicide victims of teenagers. I've done, you name every kind of funeral you could possibly do for all the different reasons. Right. And I tried to have a good theology of suffering where God is present in the midst of it, and that God could bring good out of it. Right. But there were ways that I expressed that when I was trying to comfort families that bordered on some of the things that people do to us when we're in pain. That's one of the things that, you know, your chapter where the platitudes and the cliches that we say to people when they're in pain and we want to help, but sometimes they make no sense at all. And sometimes if what they say is true, it almost adds to the pain. Right. Because they're talking about a God who maybe caused it. Right. Like if God did this to me, then pardon my French, but F that God, you know, like I don't want anything to do with that God. Right. Right. Some of the things that people, you know, like I say, when you fall apart like I did, it's amazing how many people want to preach at you. Yep. I'd be like, I've been preaching for 40 years. I've got lots of multiple degrees, and I've thought about this probably far deeper than you have. So please just be quiet. You know, like I don't need a sermon. Right. I don't need theology. Your chapter on things that people say. Mm-hmm. Had you said some of those kind of things in your previous world as pastor? Like if you think back on the funerals you did, had you, you know, isn't it interesting? Because my point that I'm going to is that you take us to a place where we're not giving answers or trying to solve the tension for our friends who are suffering, but we're literally just sitting with them and listening and in solidarity. And we just share the pain as deeply as we can, without answers, without platitudes, without stupid sayings, without misconstruing a God who we wouldn't want to have anything to do with if he's the cause of it, all of that stuff.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Did you find yourself, as you heard people saying things to you, that you thought, oh God, I probably said that before myself, and yet it doesn't work? It's not working.
Yeah, there were definitely some things, and you're referencing the chapter where I talk about where people would say things like everything happens for a reason, or God needed one more angel in heaven, or God needed him or her there more than he needed him here. Or one that was really, really troubling to me, which was something to the effect I heard a lot over the years, multiple different times, because I've been through multiple different things, which was, oh, God must really have big plans for you, as if God needed to cause all of this tragedy in other people's lives in order to build me up, for some giant thing. So I would say, I don't know how much I repeated and used those things a lot, but I will definitely say that last one in particular was something that hit me in very unhealthy ways, particularly when I was younger, my late 20s and early 30s. We went through a series of just absurd, crazy stuff that happened to us. And coming out of that, I kind of had a sense of like, oh, well, God must be getting ready to do something great, which even saying that phrase now nauseates me. Like, it's hard to even say that. But that's the way I was conditioned. And, that's the way, again, much American Christianity thinks. And there's reasons we think that. Some of it's not all terrible. I mean, we're trying to make meaning. We're all just like meaning-making creatures. And we're trying to make sense out of this. What at the end of the day, I think is something you cannot make sense out of. And you literally, once it's all stripped away, your only option is to sit with it, or to completely, or to die, which actually it doesn't even work, because I still don't think you'd be separated from love, but maybe, I don't know. So I tried to give people compassion as I went through it and as I was writing it as well. But I just began to connect the dots. Like, these weren't bad people saying these things, and I wasn't necessarily bad when I thought some of them, but you start to connect the dots and go back to the bigger thing. And the bigger thing is the religious system, the kind of pressure it's put on us to A, come up with answers, and B, to be then live into those answers such that we're victorious, overcomers, winners. Everything in the ledger is going up and to the right every quarter, and every year, because somehow that's a reflection of this controlling God who's great and victorious. It's all so deeply intertangled and unhealthy. So yeah, I fell victim to some of it more than others. And it's funny, this book, every time I do a podcast interview and every time I talk with someone will pick up something different about the book, which I kind of love. I think that says that maybe there's something substantive there. However, having said that, the most common thing people comment on is what you're commenting on. And that's the whole, like, oh, once you peel away what some of these sayings are actually saying, it's pretty gross and unhealthy. And we need a better approach. And I think the better approach is love and doing just what you said, to just slow the freak down on all the answers. Solidarity is greater than solutions.
Yeah.
And that is also my theology with respect to God and Jesus. I don't think Jesus went to the cross to fix it, to give us like the final solution, but rather Jesus is on the cross in solidarity with all of us, including those of us who killed him, but also, the victimized, those who have been scapegoated.
Yes.
So it's really beautiful. It's really messy. It's really hard. It's not as clean, but I think that that's what the depth of the thing is.
So all I can say is go out and read it. You just know that it's a deep read. It's an emotional read. And, but if you've ever found yourself grieving, and it will give you a companion, it will provide a person, Jonathan's own solidarity with your own suffering. That's how I felt.
That's nice.
I experienced the read with my own grief as I felt solidarity with your grief.
That's really nice of you to say. And thank you also for what you said earlier. I just want to highlight, right, if the listener hasn't lost a kid, I'd like to think they should still read the book, because you're right, it's dealing with larger themes of loss and the death of a dream, the death of maybe divorce, the death of a relationship, basically it's the death of the way we thought things were going to go. And that's kind of what it boils down to. And when you've lived as long as you and I have, we have seen ups and downs. Like there's a lot of death to go through, and it's challenging. So sometimes people don't read it because they're like, well, I haven't had physical death. It's really about a much more universal, even bigger thing. Well, actually, physical death is pretty universal too. But so yeah, thanks for saying that, and that means a lot to me.
Pain, suffering, trauma.
Right.
So much work going on now with trauma-informed therapy, trauma-informed all kinds of things, and this hits the mark with, I think, the kind of solidarity that we need to have with each other around places of pain and suffering and sorrow and trauma.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the work that you've done there. It's beautiful. By the way, have you ever met a guy in Kansas City named Tom Langhofer? Tom.
That name is familiar.
Tom is on Adam Hamilton's staff at Church of the Resurrection. He runs the recovery ministries, and they've really built one of the larger recovery ministries in Kansas City through Church of the Resurrection. But you might remember a few years ago on a First Friday night.
Now I remember what you're going to say. Yeah.
His daughter, Erin, there was a gang shooting and a stray bullet hit his daughter and killed her.
Right.
And she was about the same age as your daughter when she died. This was maybe 5 years ago. Tom and I, because we're both in recovery, have become friends. And I interviewed Tom on that whole experience he went through with Erin. And I was just curious. Tom would, you two would, but he would love, I'm going to recommend this to Tom.
Well, thank you. And I'll follow up with that too. I know Tom and I have a bunch of mutual friends, either at Resurrection or around town. And so it's just a good reminder to reach out to him. I'd love to connect with him.
Yeah, I can shoot a text to the two of you and connect.
Okay.
I think it'd be he's a great guy, and I think he's getting ready. I don't know if this is public or not. I probably shouldn't say anyway, but anyway.
Guess we won't say it then.
All right. So we are out of time. Thank you so much for being on Spirituality Adventures, Jonathan. And honestly, I loved your books, and I'm looking I'm going to pick up the other ones, and I'm just super grateful to be able to cross paths with you, and glad we're in the same city so we can have coffee. I'd like to keep connecting
or barbecue.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's the one thing I can do is barbecue. Well, no, I can grill. I'm a good griller, but I can't.
Nice.
I'm a chef, but when I think of barbecue, I think of grilling out, but yeah, of course, Casey barbecue too. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures. And thank you, Jonathan. Tell us how to get a hold of your website. You've got a podcast, you've got a blog that you send out. How do we get connected with?
Well, the easiest way is just to go to jonathanfosteronline.com. All the stuff is there. You can find out about the other books. You can find out about our work in Haiti, which is deeply entangled with what my daughter was doing. And we're still doing that. We're 9.5 years into the most ridiculous, absurd, challenging, but great nonprofit that we've been running, that both my boys and my wife have been super instrumental with, especially my oldest son. And yeah, you can sign up you can listen to my podcast, Jonathan_Foster, and you can sign up for my Substack newsletter. All that stuff can be found at the website.
Hey, look, wow. How did that happen? Matt, I just did a thumbs up in my, and it like fireworks went off around me.
Right when I said my URL. I mean, that's awesome.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for joining us. And thanks for you've already blessed me a whole bunch. So I really appreciate it. And I know if people take time with this podcast and some of your books, it will do the same for them. So thanks so much. God bless you. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.